The morning sun rose over New Eden like it had for the past 8 years, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded the human settlers of home. Commander Jake Sullivan stood on the observation deck of the main settlement building and watched the daily routine begin below him. Children ran through the streets, on their way to school, while their parents headed to the farms and research stations that dotted the landscape for miles in every direction. Jake smiled as he watched 10-year-old Amy Rodriguez chase her younger brother Bobby through the central plaza. Their laughter mixed with the strange musical sounds that came from the Catherine who lived alongside the humans in this corner of the galaxy. The crystalline beings moved like living gemstones, their bodies catching and reflecting the sunlight as they went about their morning tasks. New Eden had been nothing but rocks and dust when the first human ships arrived 8 years ago. The planet sat at the edge of known space, far from the shipping lanes and trade routes that connected the major worlds. Most people thought the colonists were crazy for trying to build a life in such a remote place, but Jake knew better. Sometimes the best things grew in the places where nobody else wanted to look. Dr. Lisa Morgan had been the first to see the potential in this world. She was the chief botanist for the colony and had spent years developing new crops that could grow in alien soil. Her laboratories were filled with plants that had never existed before, hybrid species that combined Earth genetics with local minerals to create food sources that were both nutritious and able to survive in the harsh conditions. The native Catherine had been suspicious at first when the humans arrived. They were an ancient species that communicated through harmonic frequencies, creating music that sounded like wind chimes mixed with whale songs. Their elder, who called himself Zix9, had initially demanded that the humans leave their world. Immediately, Ben Carter, the colony administrator, had spent months learning to communicate with the Catherine through a combination of translation software and pure patience. He discovered that the crystalline beings were not hostile, just protective of their home after centuries of isolation. Slowly, carefully, he had built a relationship based on mutual respect and shared resources. The breakthrough came when Dr. Morgan discovered that her hybrid crops actually improved the soil composition in ways that helped the Catherine reproduce. The crystalline beings grew new offspring by embedding pieces of themselves in mineral-rich earth, and the human farming techniques created perfect conditions for their life cycle. What started as an uneasy truce became a genuine partnership. Captain Roy Harrison commanded the only military vessel assigned to protect New Eden, a small frigate called the Resolute. Most days he felt more like a traffic controller than a soldier, helping coordinate supply shipments from Earth and managing the occasional visit from traders or scientists. The Outer Rim was peaceful territory, and conflicts were rare. The colony had grown from 500 original settlers to 15,000 people who had made New Eden their permanent home. There were teachers like Mrs. Helen Clark, who ran the primary school, engineers like Frank Williams, who maintained the power systems, and farmers like Amy's father, Carlos Rodriguez, who had transformed thousands of acres of barren ground into productive farmland. The success of New Eden had not gone unnoticed in the wider galaxy. Representatives from the Galactic Trade Consortium had visited twice in the past year, impressed by the agricultural output and the unique partnership with the Catherine. There was talk of establishing regular trade routes and possibly expanding the colony to accommodate more settlers. Jake often walked through the residential districts in the evening, listening to the sounds of families having dinner and children playing games in their yards. The houses were simple but comfortable, built from local materials and designed to blend with the natural landscape. Gardens filled with earth flowers grew next to plots of alien vegetables, creating a mixture of familiar and exotic that had become the signature of human colonies throughout the galaxy. The Catherine had their own section of the settlement, though the boundaries were fluid and both species moved freely throughout the colony. Their buildings looked like crystal formations that had grown from the ground, translucent structures that sang in harmony when the wind passed through them. Human children often played with young Catherine, learning their musical language while teaching them human games in return. Dr. Morgan's research had implications far beyond New Eden. Her work with hybrid agriculture could revolutionize farming on dozens of worlds, providing food security for colonies that struggled with alien environments. She had published papers that were studied at universities across human space, and her techniques were already being tested on other worlds. The colony's success story was about to face its greatest test, though none of the settlers knew it yet. Long-range sensors had detected ships approaching from deep space, vessels that were not broadcasting standard identification codes. Captain Harrison had received the readings that morning and was preparing to investigate the approaching ships. Had sent a brief message identifying themselves as refugees from a war-torn system, requesting permission to land and resupply. It was the kind of humanitarian request that New Eden had handled before, and Jake had already authorized preparations for receiving several hundred displaced beings who needed food, medical care, and temporary shelter. Amy Rodriguez ran past the administrative building where Jake stood, her backpack bouncing as she hurried to school. She waved at him through the window, and he waved back, thinking about how much the children had grown since the colony's early days. They were the first generation to be born on New Eden, and they represented the future of human expansion into the galaxy. The settlement's main plaza was filling with people preparing for the welcoming ceremony they had planned for the refugees. Dr. Morgan was arranging displays of local crops and Kethran art, while Ben Carter was setting up translation equipment to help communicate with whatever species was aboard the approaching ships. It was the kind of event that New Eden was known for, a demonstration of human hospitality and interspecies cooperation. Captain Harrison's voice came over the communication system, announcing that the refugee ships would be arriving within the hour. The colonists gathered in the plaza, excited to meet new beings and share their success story with others who had suffered hardship. Children like Amy stood with their parents, holding flowers and small gifts to welcome the strangers to their world. The ships appeared as dots in the morning sky, growing larger as they descended toward the landing fields outside the settlement. Jake felt a moment of unease as he watched them approach, something about their formation seeming too military for civilian refugees, but he pushed the feeling aside. New Eden had always been a place of hope and welcome, and today would be no different. The first energy blast cut through the morning air like lightning, striking the welcome banner that Ben Carter had hung across the main plaza. The fabric burst into flames and fell to the ground in burning pieces, landing near the feet of shocked colonists who had been holding flowers and gifts for their expected guests. Jake Sullivan watched in horror from his position on the observation deck as armed figures poured out of the landing ships. These were not refugees fleeing from war. These were soldiers bringing war to New Eden. Their armor was black and silver, covering tall humanoid forms that moved with predatory grace across the landing field toward the settlement. War Admiral Crick stepped from the largest transport ship and surveyed the human colony with cold satisfaction. His species, the Vorthen, had been raiding worlds for centuries, and this looked like another easy conquest. The intelligence reports had described humans as a weak agricultural species with minimal defenses, perfect for harvesting as slaves and stripping their world of resources. Amy Rodriguez dropped her handful of wildflowers and grabbed her little brother Bobby's hand as screaming began all around them. Their father Carlos tried to shield them with his body while looking desperately for somewhere safe to run, but the Vorthen soldiers were already surrounding the plaza from all directions. Lieutenant Pete Davis, head of the colony's small security force, was the first to react to the attack. He and his 12 officers drew their sidearms and tried to establish a defensive perimeter around the civilians, but their light weapons were no match for the military-grade plasma rifles that the Vorthen carried. Within minutes, half of the security team was dead. Dr. Lisa Morgan had been setting up her agricultural display when the attack began. She saw children crying and running in panic and immediately abandoned her scientific equipment to help evacuate the school building. Her assistant, a young woman named Kelly Nash, helped her guide dozens of frightened kids toward the underground storage areas beneath the research complex. Captain Roy Harrison was aboard the Resolute when his sensors detected energy weapons firing in the settlement below. He immediately powered up his ship's defensive systems and tried to contact the colony, but his communications were being jammed by the attacking force. The frigate's engines roared to life as he prepared to provide air support for the colonists. The Vorthen had planned their attack carefully, and Harrison's ship was their first priority target. 3 enemy fighters had been waiting in orbit, hidden behind the larger transport vessels. They struck the Resolute with coordinated missile strikes that overwhelmed its shields and tore through the hull in seconds. Harrison died at his command. Post. Still trying to send a distress signal to Earth. Admiral Crix walked through the plaza like he was inspecting merchandise at a market. His soldiers had rounded up hundreds of colonists, forcing them to kneel in rows while Vorthen officers decided who would be valuable as slaves and who would be eliminated immediately. The elderly and infirm were being separated from the younger, stronger humans. Ben Carter stepped forward from the crowd of prisoners, his hands raised in a gesture of peaceful surrender. He had spent years learning diplomatic protocols and believed he could negotiate some kind of agreement that would spare the innocent civilians. His translator device was broadcasting his words in multiple galactic languages as he spoke. The administrator's plea for mercy lasted exactly 30 seconds before a Vorthen officer shot him in the chest with a plasma rifle. His body fell backward into the dust, and the message was clear to every human watching. There would be no negotiation, no terms, no mercy for anyone. The Kethrin Elder Zix-9 tried to reach the human settlement when he heard the sounds of weapons fire echoing across the valley. His crystalline body moved quickly over the rocky terrain, but he was too late to help. Vorthen soldiers had been waiting for him, knowing that the native species would attempt to aid their human partners. The torture of Zix-9 was methodical and cruel, designed to break the harmonic frequencies that allowed Kethrin to communicate. The soldiers wanted his crystalline body structure intact for harvesting, so they used sonic disruptors that caused agony without damaging the valuable material. His death song lasted for hours, a haunting melody that could be heard throughout the settlement. Amy and Bobby Rodriguez were hiding in the hydroponics laboratory beneath Dr. Morgan's research building. The botanist had sealed the entrance and was using her knowledge of the facility's layout to keep 23 children and 6 adults hidden from the Vorthen search teams that were methodically clearing every building. The sounds from above told the story of systematic execution. Families were being separated, with children torn from their parents' arms before both groups were loaded onto transport ships or simply killed where they stood. The Vorthen soldiers showed no emotion as they carried out their orders, treating human lives like inventory to be processed. Lieutenant Davis made his final stand at the communications center, trying to get one message through to the outside galaxy before the Vorthen could shut down all transmissions. He and his remaining officers held the building for 2 hours against overwhelming odds, buying precious time for Dr. Morgan to attempt her own desperate communication. The colony's quantum communicator was located in the basement of the research complex, just 50 meters from where Amy and the other children were hiding. Dr. Morgan crawled through maintenance tunnels to reach the device, knowing that their only hope was to warn other human colonies about what was happening on New Eden. The quantum transmitter was damaged by weapons fire but still partially functional. Dr. Morgan worked frantically to encode a message while listening to footsteps and shouting from the floors above her. She could hear the Vorthen soldiers getting closer, and she knew she had only minutes before they found her location. Her message was simple and desperate. This is Dr. Lisa Morgan from New Eden Colony. We are under attack by an unknown hostile species. They showed no mercy to civilians, children, or elderly. 15,000 colonists dead or captured. They call themselves Vorthen. Do not trust their diplomatic overtures. They are slavers and murderers. Remember us. Remember what they did here. Make them pay. The transmission barely made it through the Vorthen jamming systems before enemy soldiers broke down the door to the communications room. Dr. Morgan died with her hand still on the transmit button, her last act on behalf of the colony that Had been her life's work for 8 years. The massacre continued for 6 hours total. When it was finally over, the settlement that had taken nearly a decade to build was reduced to smoking ruins. Bodies lay scattered through the streets, and the carefully tended gardens were trampled and burned. The Catherine crystal formations had been harvested completely, leaving only empty holes where their beautiful structures had stood. Amy Rodriguez clutched her little brother in the darkness beneath the research building, listening to the silence that had fallen over their world. Of the 15,000 people who had called New Eden home that morning, fewer than 300 were still alive, loaded onto Vorthan ships as cargo bound for slave markets in distant systems. War Admiral Crick stood in the ruins of the main plaza and logged the attack in his official records as a routine resource acquisition. The humans had provided adequate slaves, and the Catherine crystals would bring good prices from collectors throughout Vorthan space. It had been a profitable day with minimal casualties among his own forces. The Vorthan ships lifted off from New Eden's surface, leaving behind a world of death and destruction. They had no way of knowing that one quantum transmission had escaped their jamming, carrying news of their crimes toward human space at faster-than-light speed. The message would take 3 months to reach Earth, but when it arrived, everything would change. Admiral Kate Turner was reviewing routine patrol reports in her office at the Seoul Defense Network headquarters when the priority alert flashed across her screen. The quantum communication from New Eden had been received by monitoring stations throughout human space simultaneously, and its contents had triggered emergency protocols that hadn't been used in over a century. President Clark Williams convened an emergency session of the Colonial Defense Council within 6 hours of receiving Dr. Morgan's final transmission. The leaders of humanity's scattered colonies joined the meeting through secure quantum links, their faces grim as they listened to the desperate message from the destroyed settlement. The recording played 3 times before anyone spoke. Dr. Morgan's voice, crackling with static from the damaged transmitter, described the systematic slaughter of 15,000 innocent civilians by an unknown alien species that called themselves the Vorthan. Her words painted a picture of ruthless efficiency and complete disregard for human life. Colonel Max Stone, Chief Intelligence Officer for the Terran Fleet, began his investigation immediately. The quantum signature from the destroyed New Eden communicator provided coordinates and timing data that allowed his team to trace the path of the attacking ships. Within 48 hours, they had identified the Vorthan Empire as a military confederation that controlled 17 star systems on the far side of explored space. Commander Rachel Torres received orders to take her stealth reconnaissance ship, the Wraith, on a deep penetration mission into Vorthan territory. Her ship was designed for intelligence gathering, equipped with advanced sensors and cloaking technology that would allow her to observe enemy installations without being detected. The journey to Vorthan space took 3 weeks, during which time Colonel Stone's intelligence division worked around the clock to gather every piece of available information about the species that had destroyed New Eden. What they discovered was worse than anyone had imagined. The Vorthan Empire was built on conquest and slavery, with a military doctrine that emphasized the complete extermination of any species that might resist their expansion. Their territory was littered with dead worlds, entire civilizations that had been wiped out for resources, or simply to establish dominance over local space. Dr. Neil Brooks, Earth's leading expert on alien biology, analyzed fragments of Vorthan technology recovered from old battle sites. His findings were disturbing beyond measure. The Vorthan had been genetically modified centuries ago by an unknown force, their natural empathy and social bonds surgically removed and replaced with aggressive instincts that made them perfect. Weapons of War. Commander Torres transmitted her first intelligence report from the edge of Vorthan space after observing 3 of their military installations. The enemy forces were smaller than initial estimates suggested, with perhaps 200,000 active military personnel spread across their 17 worlds. Their advantage came from superior technology and the willingness to use it without mercy against civilian populations. The Galactic Council, a loose confederation of peaceful species that included humans as junior members, held an emergency session to discuss the situation. Representative species like the tree-like Sylvani and the aquatic Delphinians urged restraint and diplomatic solutions, arguing that military action would destabilize the entire region. Ambassador Helen Carter, Ben Carter's sister and Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, listened to hours of debate about proportional response and the importance of maintaining peace. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the weight of personal loss and barely controlled rage. The ambassador played audio recordings from New Eden's security systems that had been recovered by search and rescue teams. The sounds of children screaming, parents begging for mercy, and the systematic execution of civilians filled the council chambers. Several alien representatives left the session, unable to continue listening to the evidence of Vorthan brutality. President Williams faced the most difficult decision in human history as reports continued to arrive from Vorthan territory. Commander Torres had discovered slave processing centers, where hundreds of thousands of beings from dozens of species were being held in conditions that violated every principle of galactic law. Dr. Brooks presented his analysis of Vorthan biology to the Colonial Defense Council, explaining that the genetic modifications made it impossible for the species to feel empathy or remorse. They were living weapons that could only be stopped through force, as they were literally incapable of understanding concepts like mercy or peaceful coexistence. Intelligence reports from the Wraith revealed the locations of major Vorthan military installations, including their homeworld of Korthak Prime, where War Admiral Crix maintained his headquarters. The enemy had grown complacent from centuries of easy victories against unprepared civilizations and had not bothered to heavily fortify their core systems. Admiral Turner began preliminary planning for a military response while hoping that diplomatic pressure might still resolve the crisis. She ordered the mobilization of reserve forces and the recall of exploration vessels from deep space, preparing for the possibility that humanity would have to go to war for the first time since achieving interstellar flight. The breakthrough came when Commander Torres managed to infiltrate a Vorthan communication relay and download complete records of their recent military operations. The data revealed not just the attack on New Eden, but systematic genocide against 47 different species over the past 2 centuries. Among the downloaded files was footage from the New Eden attack itself, recorded by Vorthan soldiers as part of their standard operational procedures. The video showed War Admiral Crix personally executing civilian prisoners, including children who had been separated from their parents during the initial assault. The most damning evidence came in the form of recorded communications between Vorthan commanders discussing their plans to expand into human space. New Eden had been chosen as a test target to evaluate human military capabilities, and the ease of their victory had convinced them that the entire human sphere could be conquered within a few years. President Williams called a final emergency session with the Colonial Defense Council, the military leadership, and representatives from every human colony. The evidence was overwhelming, and the threat to humanity's future was clear. The Vorthan would not stop with New Eden, and they could not be reasoned with or deterred through diplomatic means. Admiral Turner presented the military options available to human forces, including detailed plans for strikes against Vorthan military installations and supply lines. The technology gap between human and Vorthan forces was smaller than initially feared, and humanity possessed certain advantages that the enemy had not encountered before. The debate lasted 18 hours before President Williams called for a final vote. The decision had to be unanimous among all human colonies, as the consequences would affect every settlement from Earth to the furthest outposts. One by one, the representatives cast their votes for military action. Ambassador Carter delivered humanity's response to the Galactic Council in a speech that would be remembered for centuries. She announced that humans were withdrawing from all diplomatic efforts regarding the Vorthan Empire, and would be pursuing military solutions to protect their citizens and prevent future atrocities. The final authorization came in the form of a single document signed by President Williams and countersigned by Admiral Turner. Operation Righteous Fury was officially approved, giving human military forces complete authority to engage Vorthan targets throughout their territory using any means necessary. As the orders went out to fleet commanders across human space. Admiral Turner spoke the words that would define humanity's transformation from peaceful explorers to galactic enforcers. They wanted mercy from Deathworlders, they chose poorly. The message was transmitted to every human military installation simultaneously, along with complete intelligence packages about Vorthan locations and capabilities. Within hours, ships that had been disguised as merchant vessels and research platforms began revealing their true nature as humanity, prepared to show the galaxy what happened when someone made the mistake of slaughtering their children. War Admiral Crix would soon learn that the humans he had dismissed as weak farmers were actually the product of a world so violent that survival required becoming apex predators. The Vorthan Empire had 3 months to enjoy their victory over New Eden before the Deathworlders came for revenge. The first sign that humanity was not what the galaxy believed came from the asteroid belt, where mining platforms that had operated peacefully for decades suddenly transformed into military shipyards. Captain Dan Mitchell watched from the bridge of the heavy cruiser Valkyrie as dozens of warships emerged from concealed construction bays that had been hidden inside hollowed-out asteroids. Admiral Alex Cooper commanded Battle Group Alpha from the flagship Nemesis, a dreadnought-class vessel that had been disguised as a deep space research station for 15 years. The ship's true nature was revealed when its outer hull sections separated to expose weapons arrays that could crack planets and defensive systems capable of withstanding direct hits from antimatter torpedoes. Similar scenes played out across human space as the peaceful facade that had hidden humanity's true military capabilities for generations suddenly fell away. Mining colonies revealed hidden missile silos. Agricultural worlds activated orbital defense platforms, and merchant vessels shed their civilian disguises to become fast attack craft. The Titan defense platform emerged from Saturn's rings like a metallic moon, its massive form bristling with weapons that had been developed in secret laboratories throughout the Sol system. The platform had been built over 20 years using technology derived from humanity's violent past, incorporating lessons learned from centuries of warfare against their own species. Captain Steve Parker led the first strike against Vorthan forces. At Kepler Station, a supply depot on the outer edge of their territory, his squadron of 12 destroyers appeared out of hyperspace in perfect formation, their weapons already charged and targeting systems locked onto every structure in the system. The attack lasted exactly 17 minutes from beginning to end. Vorthan defenders scrambled to respond to the human assault, but their reaction time was fatally slow compared to the precision coordination of Parker's fleet. Every enemy ship was destroyed, every installation reduced to debris, and every military communication relay was silenced. Before departing the system, Captain Parker broadcast a message on all Vorthan frequencies using their own translation protocols. His words were simple and direct, carrying a promise that would soon spread throughout enemy territory like a plague of fear. This is humanity. You slaughtered our innocents at New Eden. You showed no mercy to our children. Now you will face our soldiers. We are coming for you, and we will not stop until every one of your kind answers for their crimes. General Linda Hayes coordinated ground assault forces from her command ship, the Retribution, as human Marines prepared for boarding actions against Vorthan vessels. These soldiers had been trained in combat techniques that evolved on a world where predators ruled and only the strongest survived to reproduce. The galaxy watched in shock as intelligence reports arrived describing human military capabilities that far exceeded anything in their databases. The peaceful farmers and scientists who had joined the Galactic Council as junior members were actually the product of a Class 12 death world, a planet so violent that its inhabitants had become apex predators. Captain Tony Rodriguez commanded the assault ship Warhammer and led the first boarding action against a Vorthan heavy cruiser. Amy's older brother had been off-world studying advanced engineering when New Eden was destroyed, and he had volunteered for the most dangerous missions as soon as he learned about his family's fate. The Vorthen crew fought desperately to repel the human boarders, but they were unprepared for the savagery of soldiers who had evolved from predators. Human marines moved through the enemy ship like a pack of wolves, using tactics that combined advanced technology with primitive hunting, instincts that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. Dr. Neil Brooks worked with military analysts to identify weaknesses in Vorthen technology and biology that could be exploited during combat operations. His research revealed that the genetic modifications that made them perfect killers had also removed their ability to adapt quickly to new threats or think creatively under pressure. Admiral Turner coordinated the overall campaign from her command center on Earth, directing multiple battle groups as they struck targets throughout Vorthen space. The enemy had never faced an opponent that could match their technology, while surpassing their tactical flexibility and willingness to use overwhelming force. The Vengeance Armada, as the human fleet came to be known, cut through Vorthen defenses with the efficiency of a surgical laser. Every engagement ended in complete victory for humanity, with enemy forces either destroyed or captured for interrogation. About the locations of slave processing centers. Commander Rachel Torres continued her reconnaissance missions deep in enemy territory, now supported by a fleet of stealth ships that gathered intelligence on Vorthen population centers and military installations. Her reports provided targeting data for strikes that would cripple the enemy's ability to wage war while minimizing civilian casualties. The turning point came when human forces liberated their first slave processing center on the world of Mother 7. Captain Rodriguez led the assault personally, fighting through layers of Vorthen security to reach the holding areas where thousands of beings from dozens of species were being prepared for transport to markets. Throughout the Empire, among the rescued prisoners were 237 survivors from New Eden, including children who had been separated from their families during the original attack. Amy Rodriguez was found in a detention cell barely large enough for her small body, her spirit broken by months of captivity but her will to survive still intact. The reunion between Amy and her brother, Tony, was broadcast throughout human space, becoming a symbol of why the war was being fought. The young girl's testimony about the treatment of prisoners provided additional evidence of Vorthen brutality that eliminated any remaining doubts about the necessity of military action. War Admiral Crix received reports of human attacks with growing alarm as his outer territories fell one by one to the advancing enemy fleet. The species he had dismissed as weak farmers was systematically dismantling his empire with a level of military precision that exceeded anything in Vorthen military doctrine. The enemy commander attempted to negotiate a ceasefire through intermediaries in the Galactic Council, offering to release human prisoners and withdraw from disputed territories in exchange for an end to hostilities. His overtures were transmitted to Admiral Turner, who provided a response that ended all hopes of diplomatic resolution. You had your chance for mercy when you stood over the bodies of our children. You chose to murder them instead. There will be no negotiation, no ceasefire, no terms. You will surrender unconditionally or you will be destroyed. Those are your only options. Admiral Turner's ultimatum was accompanied by footage from the liberated slave centers, showing the conditions that human prisoners had endured and the systematic torture that had been inflicted on captured colonists. The evidence eliminated any sympathy that other galactic species might have felt for the Vorthen cause. The final phase of Operation Righteous Fury began with simultaneous strikes against every major Vorthen military installation in their home system. The Vengeance Armada had grown to over 200 ships as reserve forces and recalled exploration vessels joined the campaign. Captain Parker's destroyers led the assault on the orbital shipyards above Korthek Prime, while Admiral Cooper's battle group engaged the main Vorthen fleet in a running battle that stretched across 3 planetary orbits. The enemy fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but their tactics were predictable and their technology no longer provided any significant advantage. Admiral Crix made his final broadcast to the human fleet as his defensive lines collapsed around him. His message was a mixture of threats and appeals for mercy, claiming that his species was only following its natural instincts and should not be held responsible for actions that were encoded in their genetic structure. Admiral Turner's response came not in words, but in the form of quantum torpedoes that reduced the Vorthen Command Center to radioactive dust. The message was clear to every observer in the galaxy. Humanity had moved beyond the civilized restraints that governed other species and was operating under the laws of their violent homeworld. The systematic destruction of Vorthen military forces continued for 6 days until only scattered remnants remained to offer token resistance. The empire that had terrorized dozens of species for centuries was broken, its leaders dead or captured, its ability to wage war permanently eliminated. As the last enemy stronghold fell to human assault forces, Admiral Turner prepared to deliver the final judgment on a species that had shown no mercy to innocents and now begged for the very thing they had denied to others. The final assault on Korthak Prime began at dawn, with the human fleet arranged in perfect battle formation above the Vorthen homeworld. Admiral Kate Turner stood on the bridge of the Nemesis, watching through the viewscreen as the last remnants of the enemy fleet attempted one desperate counterattack against the overwhelming force arrayed against them. War Admiral Crix commanded his final battle from the surface of his homeworld, surrounded by the ruins of what had once been the most powerful military empire in this region of the galaxy. His remaining ships were outnumbered 10-1, and his ground forces were demoralized by months of continuous defeats at the hands of the human war machine. Captain Tony Rodriguez led the rescue mission to the primary slave processing center on Korthak Prime, where intelligence reports indicated that the remaining New Eden survivors were being held in maximum security detention. His assault ship Warhammer descended through the planet's atmosphere, under heavy fire from defensive installations that were quickly silenced by supporting orbital bombardment. The battle for the detention center lasted 3 hours, with human Marines fighting through multiple layers of Vorthen security forces, who had been ordered to execute all prisoners rather than allow them to be rescued. Tony's soldiers moved with the calculated ferocity of predators, using tactics that their enemies could not predict or counter effectively. Amy Rodriguez was found in a cell deep beneath the main complex, barely alive after months of imprisonment and systematic torture. Her brother carried her personally from the facility, and her rescue was broadcast throughout human space as a symbol of why the war had been necessary, and just the liberation of the slave centers revealed the true scope of Vorthen crimes against galactic civilization. Over 3 million beings from 47 different species had been held in conditions that violated every principle of intelligent life, treated as property to be bought and sold in markets throughout the empire. Dr. Neil Brooks coordinated medical teams that treated the rescued prisoners, documenting the physical and psychological damage that had been inflicted by their captors. His reports provided additional evidence for the war crimes tribunals that would judge the surviving Vorthen leadership. War Admiral Crix made a final broadcast to the human fleet as his planetary defenses crumbled around him. His message was transmitted on all frequencies, a desperate plea for mercy that echoed the same words his victims had spoken before their execution. We surrender unconditionally. We will accept any terms you impose. We ask only for the mercy that civilized species show to defeated enemies. We were following our nature, programmed by forces beyond our control. Please show us the compassion that separates intelligent beings from savage animals. Admiral Turner listened to the enemy commander's plea while reviewing footage from the New Eden massacre, recordings of children begging for their lives before being shot down in cold blood. Her response was broadcast throughout the galaxy, heard by representatives of every spacefaring species. You had 8 years to learn about mercy while you lived alongside the humans of New Eden. You had opportunities to understand compassion when our colonists welcomed refugees and shared their resources with strangers. You chose genocide instead. You chose to murder children and harvest their parents as slaves. Now you face the justice of a death world. The bombardment of Vorthen military installations was precise and methodical, targeting only facilities that supported their war machine while leaving civilian population centers untouched. Human commanders demonstrated the surgical precision that came from centuries of warfare, showing restraint that their enemies had never possessed. Captain Steve Parker coordinated the final assault on the Vorthen fleet, leading his squadron in a battle that would be studied at military academies for generations. The enemy ships fought with desperate courage, but their tactics were rigid and predictable compared to the adaptive strategies employed by human commanders. The capture of War Admiral Crix came when his command bunker was breached by human special forces led by Captain Rodriguez. The Vorthen leader was taken alive, along with his senior staff, to face trial for crimes against galactic civilization that included genocide, slavery, and systematic torture of prisoners. The military tribunal was held on neutral ground at the Galactic Council headquarters, with representatives from every affected species serving as witnesses to the proceedings. The evidence presented included thousands of hours of recordings, testimony from survivors, and documentation of systematic atrocities spanning 2 centuries. War Admiral Crix and his officers were sentenced to life imprisonment on a maximum security facility constructed specifically to hold beings too dangerous to be executed but too evil to be allowed any possibility of escape. The prison was built on an airless moon where the inmates would spend eternity contemplating their crimes. The restoration of worlds devastated by Vorthen expansion began immediately after the military phase of the operation concluded. Human engineering teams worked alongside liberated populations to rebuild cities, restore ecosystems, and provide medical care for survivors of the slave camps. Amy Rodriguez stood beside Admiral Turner at the dedication ceremony for the New Eden Memorial, built on the site where her parents and thousands of other colonists had been murdered. The inscription was simple and direct, carrying a message that would be remembered throughout the galaxy. To those who showed no mercy to the innocent, the Deathworlders delivered justice. Let this monument remind all who see it that some crimes cannot be forgiven, and some species will not be ignored when their children are threatened. The memorial ceremony was attended by representatives from dozens of species that had suffered under Vorthen rule, including several that had been considered extinct until survivors were found in the slave processing centers. The diversity of the crowd demonstrated the scope of the Empire's crimes and the magnitude of humanity's intervention. Captain Dan Mitchell commanded the new defensive installations that were established throughout former Vorthen territory, ensuring that the power vacuum left by the Empire's destruction would not be filled by other aggressive species. Human military bases were built on key worlds, manned by soldiers who understood that their presence was the price of galactic peace. The transformation of human colonies throughout the galaxy was complete and permanent. Children still played in parks and attended schools, but now they did so under the protection of visible orbital weapons platforms and defensive installations that reminded everyone of humanity's true nature. Dr. Lisa Morgan's agricultural research was continued by her former students, who established the Morgan Institute for Hybrid Agriculture on the rebuilt New Eden. Her work would feed millions of beings throughout the galaxy, a positive legacy from a world that had been born in hope and reborn through vengeance. The Galactic Council formally recognized humanity's new status as the primary peacekeeping force in their region of space, acknowledging that diplomatic solutions were not always possible when dealing with species that could not comprehend concepts like mercy or negotiation. Admiral Turner retired from active duty but continued to serve as an advisor for colonial defense planning, helping to design systems that would ensure no human settlement would ever again face the fate that befell New Eden. Her strategic doctrine became the foundation for galactic security policy for the next century. The final chapter of the war came when Amy Rodriguez, now a young woman studying xenobiology at the rebuilt colony, discovered references to the species that had originally modified the Vorthen genetics centuries ago. The trail led to dark corners of the galaxy where other predator races waited for opportunities to expand their own empires. President Williams authorized expanded exploration and defensive preparations as humanity accepted its role as the galaxy's guardian against species that threatened peaceful civilization. The Deathworld had produced guardians, Who would ensure that mercy remained possible? For those who chose to embrace it, the message that echoed through space from every human colony was clear and uncompromising. Humanity preferred peace but was prepared for war. They would offer friendship to those who came in good faith, but they would deliver swift and overwhelming vengeance to any species that threatened the innocent. The galaxy was safer now, protected by beings who had evolved on a world where only the strongest survived, who understood that sometimes mercy could only be preserved through the application of merciless force against those who would destroy it. The Deathworlders had spoken, and the universe had listened.